I'm hoping to be controversial here because I want to hear what people say about this. So, in no way am I for abortion, killing children at any whim whatsoever. But no way am I arguing. Uh, once the sperm and the eggs come together, we have a human being being created here. I believe that. I believe I believe it's atrocious. The reasons people abort babies, blah blah blah, all that's true. I'm extremely conservative. I think you're all heathens for not keeping the Sabbath and pretending like the law of God doesn't exist. I think you're totally ridiculous. But I'm also for religious freedom. So what does that mean? It means I wouldn't try to force you to keep the Sabbath. I'd fight I would fight a war, risking my own life to make sure you weren't forced to keep the Sabbath. Okay, but I think you're supposed to. And so, with that in mind, let's talk about abortion. So, I'm not a liberal. I'm not for abortion, but assuming everything is true that I'm saying here, let's think about hypothetical. You go to 3 different doctors that are legit, and they all pretty much come to the same conclusion because of complications of disease or whatever circumstances, your pregnancy. They all 3 doctors that aren't talking to each other that you go to pretty much say you have a 50-50 chance of surviving the pregnancy. Who should decide whether or not you have to go through the pregnancy or not? I'll be darned if I say the state decides that. That is perverted. Who gets to decide? Well, if you go to 3 different doctors and they all say you have slightly better than 50-50 chance of surviving. What if you have 5 other kids and they're dependent on you? What if it's 30-70, like you have a 30% chance? Who gets to decide that you must go through with the pregnancy? This is ridiculous. That is not the state's decision. Okay? Again, I'm not for abortion at all. It's murder. But is it murder when is it murder? When does it become reasonable to say, look, there's all sorts of questions. Like, there is a difference between being pregnant for 1 day and being pregnant for 6 months. I'm sorry. Ending a pregnancy of being pregnant for 1 day is not the same thing as destroying a human with a heartbeat and removing the pieces. It's not. So here's my point. Who gets to decide you must go through with a pregnancy? Doesn't matter what. So I'm not for making abortion legal, just however you want. But I'm just being honest. Like, if I had a wife and she, had other kids and they're dependent on her, like, I respect people who go take the risk. But you could even say certain circumstances, like, it would be dangerous to risk your life if you have other children to take that are dependent on you, right? So I'm just trying to be realistic with realistic circumstances here. Who gets to say whether or not it's the family's decision, not the state's decision? So, and I'm fully aware of what people do and say regarding this issue, and it's totally polarized and but sorry, I'll just tell you, if there was a good chance she was going to die and had other kids and they're dependent on her, and it was a risky pregnancy, she might die and the kid could die too. Even if the kid, like, oh, we can save the baby, but your wife's almost certainly going to die. I don't know. Hey, Amber. Hey, Surat. So this is my thinking on it. I'm just being realistic. Like, if I'm thinking about being faced with that, like my wife, say I have a young wife, we have 2 other kids, and the kids are depending on her to take care of them, and a bunch of different doctors that aren't consulting each other, that are professional, tell me my wife has a 30% chance of surviving the pregnancy. I don't want the state saying we have to go through the pregnancy, or that, like, it's hard. Where are you going to draw that line, right? So, anybody have any thought? Does anybody want to come on? You guys, I'll put it out there. I just wanted to put that out there. I tried to do this before and I didn't get any response because I have a lot of friends that are like, no abortion or whatever. And I'm like, I like the idea of not killing babies. Okay. So, but these harder circumstances. And so what does it look like? What does that look like? Like, well, 3 independent doctors say it's more risky than not to go through with the pregnancy. Then you can do it. Like when does that anyway? So to me, call me I am from Seattle. But I just don't think that's I mean, I'm for religious freedom, so like the state should not be mandating that. So but then what are the implications of that? Does that mean like, well, what if she has like I mean, every pregnancy is risky. Like you could die. Does that mean everybody gets to decide if they want to do it? I don't know. I'm not sure. Um, so that's my thoughts on it. So I think when people, I think there's this position out there. I don't do a lot of research on this or anything, but like I forget what they call like abolitionists, like no abortion period. That's just stupid. Just stupid. It's way more complicated than that. So, you know, I'm not saying I have the answer, but like, okay, so then what if I had to choose between total abolition, whatever that means, of any kind of abortion? Like, am I going to be Luddites about this? Like, what? I would say. So here's a question: like, what? Maybe I could ask myself, like, so what about just free range abortion versus no abortion period? Which one would I choose? I have to be honest with you. I think I would choose letting people abort. Is that terrible? Maybe. I'm open to having my mind changed about that. I would just say, I guess I'm just really about freedom there. And you can say I'm like a murderer or whatever, I guess. But that's my honest opinion, like off the top of my head. Like, well, we have to either totally outlaw it, period, no matter what. I'm just thinking of people who would be in that situation where like the mother is going to die. Almost certainly. Is that making her go through with that rather than say just how it's been where people can just get abortions willy-nilly, which I think is awful, by the way. I think I might have to go with the Democratic position on that, if I'm honest, rather than just full outlaw. As horrible as that is, but it's like, look, God sorts that out. God's the judge in the end. So does that mean we should just open the door, let people murder each other? No. But this is different. This is a different sort of thing. And so like people will be judged for what they decide to do. Yeah, I think I would go with that rather than just like a full across the board out ban or whatever. I think that's might be the right position to take, as terrible as it is. Anyway, I'll leave it there. By the way, Seventh Adventists are not pro-abortion. I probably have a liberal view there, what I just said. I do not represent my church on that opinion. I didn't, in fact, the people I talked to wouldn't have never said that. So let me just be clear. I'm not parroting an Adventist view whatsoever. Okay. Although there are some that I'm sure take that view. I don't like what some people say about this issue in our church, but I'm just being real. That's where I'm at. Everybody I've been around that talks about this issue, I mean, where I grew up in school, like they used to do, go to abortion clinics and with signs or whatever. And I'm not saying I'm against that. I'm not. That was a hypothetical. Remember, what I said was a hypothetical. I'm just trying to challenge myself as I'm thinking here. But that's what I think. Let me know why I'm terrible or right in the comments. Good to see you guys. Stefan, Amber. No one wants to join. Talk about whatever you can. I'll open it up for whatever. One more time. I'll wait a minute. I'm open. I'd love to talk to anybody about whatever. But I was just thinking about that because I posted something and my friend responded and just putting it out there. I'm open to being rebuked. But I never hear people who are like conservative talking about that stuff. Like, how do you draw that line? Because like as soon as you draw lines where it's like, well, if this is the case, then we're going to allow it. It seems like necessary, right? But then it's like, once you say, well, in these circumstances, it's okay, people are going to find a way to like get themselves under that exemption anyway. Okay, cool. Amber, what's up?
Hey,
I heard.
how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I wasn't going to jump in, but I love the idea of batting around these really difficult and hard topics. Because
Yeah,
there's no easy answer to this, really.
yeah. And like I have no agenda. I'm like I'm
Mhm.
super conservative on pretty much everything, but like if I like challenge myself and I'm honest and I'm thinking like, okay, I'm going to put myself in the shoes where like my wife and my family and like what would I want to do? And I'm just thinking like I'm probably going to be the guy who's like I'm going to like want my wife not to die. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
I
I'd probably be a
mean,
wimp. Like I don't want you to risk it. Like even if there's like a 20% chance you're gonna not make it, I don't want to do it. Part of me says that, maybe not though. I mean, I'm not in that situation, but
well,
I
in
wouldn't
my
like
brain,
condemn
I
someone.
step back even bigger. Like, how do you decide whose life is more important? Because that's the whole point of the Old Testament. The whole point of Torah is the sanctity of life and choose life and the redemption of life. But whose life is more important in that scenario?
Yeah, and you get in some really weird areas, like
Mm-hmm.
when Warren brought up months ago or whatever. It's just like I remember my atheist friend was like, "Okay, well, if you guys think all babies go to heaven no matter what, then like if we aborted all of them, none of them will go to hell." So like that whole question gets interesting too, I think. Um, it's not.
That's just that makes me cringe.
I know, right? But
The
like,
whole thing
but
just makes me cringe.
yeah, that's awful. Obviously, like I think the idea, I think I think, but I do think is what that brings up to like discuss is like what life and death is. Perhaps like I feel like
Mm-hmm.
my view makes that a little bit easier to like, it's like if you kill people, like in it makes me think of, like when the church was persecuting heretics, right? Because they believe
Mm-hmm.
heretical things that most people would say like they're not saved because they believe the wrong thing, and like they were putting them under duress to get them to recant their false heretical beliefs to save their soul, their eternal souls. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
is God? You can like you can kind of put yourself in their shoes and go like, well, they're trying to save their their eternal soul here. Like Jesus seems to condemn that, right? Matthew 13, I would argue. Don't try to pluck up the tares amongst the wheat because Jesus will be the judge.
Mm-hmm.
But like at what point do you stop pressuring somebody but you have their soul in mind? Any thoughts on that?
I don't. I go back, I guess, just because where I spend my mental time most of the time in the Old Testament, it's the whole idea and the whole way that so much of this works and Hebrew itself works is it's a rule until it's not. And then when it's not, then it's not until it is. And it's just this idea of I don't know, you follow the law until preservation of life with David and the showbread, or just the different exceptions that were made to Sabbath to save a life, or the law is the law until it's not. And that makes me think about how does that fold over to my now context? At what point, if I don't know if you're even following my thought there, but
Oh yeah.
How in the question of not just of abortion, but of euthanasia, of medical care, of all it, that whole realm of life and death. How do you, in those situations, weigh out this question of whose life is more valuable? We're supposed to protect the vulnerable, but you know, David in the showbread, he was sort of vulnerable, but not the definition of the orphan, the widow, the foreigner. Like it gets really squishy really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And this sort of issue comes up all the time because of like,
Mm-hmm.
like, I advocate for the Sabbath, right? And sometimes I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of jerky about it, and other times I'm like, I don't want to be like, you know what I mean? I've told you before,
Yeah.
like I I
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be like manipulative with people, but I also want to be honest about how I feel about it. But also like, you're like, it's better to do it. It seems like God wants you to. I don't hate you if you don't, or think you're like going to hell if you don't, or whatever. I just think God's saying do this or whatever. And then it's like don't want to patronize people, and I don't want to. So it's like all you can do is just try to be a good example and just be
Mm-hmm.
genuine, right? So, but like with these issues, so it's like people will come at me and like tell me I don't get it, and I'm being, like, and that's fine. I get where people are coming from, and they're probably right some of the time. I'm not totally getting it, but I just mean like how to respond to that. Are people gaslighting you? Do they really care or hearing what you're saying? And it's like it's the same thing here. It's like with medical intervention, that kind of, if you think about that historically, how that kind of, you could just, well, you throw
Mm-hmm.
the lot in the lap and the outcome is the Lord. So does that mean you could make an argument against medical intervention that way, right? So
Right. Well, and I've got, you know, in realms where I've deal with like chronic suffering, and there are days where, because I have had chronic pain issues since I was 12 years old, and so by the time you get to be my age, it's kind of like this is getting very, very old. And it's this question of suffering and whose life has more value, just because there are no anybody. I think this is just my opinion, is probably going to get me in trouble too, but I think anybody who has a fast easy answer to this is probably wrong. I don't care what your answer is, because these are too complicated of questions to just pop out a quick, easy, unthought out answer.
yeah, I take what some people would call a liberal view there too, where like there is a point where someone's suffering, they
Mhm.
should get to decide whether they want to, that's a really dangerous issue too there. I would say I
Mhm.
used to I used to do streams where I like play on words or whatever all the time just because I'm goofy that way. But I was like, I put a big picture of like a crowd of Asian kids, and I said, youth in Asia, for or against, question mark, to talk about this issue. Just I know it's kind of weird, and it's like euthanasia, right? Are you for them or against them? It's like talking about euthanasia, but ha ha ha. But I mean, are you for or against? Obviously, you're for youths in Asia, but not necessarily for euthanasia. But I mean, people, I don't like the idea of suicide pods at every corner for
Mhm.
people who feel like it. But I think I grew up in a nursing home, so
Mhm.
there is, I can understand. I wouldn't want to take the right fully away from it in every circumstance. Like no matter what, you got to. But at the same time, you hate to open the door for any sort of inappropriate, uh, you know, not caring for life, right? And that's where the
Right. And
medical
it's
intervention thing gets difficult.
yeah, it does. And at what point, and then I have to think about, sometimes maybe our perception. So, I for a while I did social work, and I was a case manager for adults with different disabilities, and a lot of them were like cognitive disabilities. And it always really struck me in the populations that I was working with, that there were a lot of my clients on my caseload that had certain kinds of disabilities. I don't want to go into names because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that in general, the population was treated as less than human, with less than human value. But a lot of my clients with certain types of disabilities were the most content, happy, joyful people that were so much walking through life so much easier and made everybody's life around them so much better. And to say that that person is disposable because they have lesser value, I find that also problematic. And
I
so
find that
this,
deeply disturbing to think that way, to
yeah,
be honest.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was trying to be generous.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I feel you on that. Those circumstances, and like, I think you can make a good case that, like, in no way do I think people with disabilities are less valuable in any way. In fact,
Mhm,
a lot of times I think they're more valuable in given circumstances, especially for those around them as well. And like you said, like, in no way would I want to devalue that. And, but then there's like, what's the principle here? And then you could
mhm,
argue the principle is that God is the decider and we should do everything we can to preserve life. And
mhm,
I'm very susceptible. I think that's a good answer. But then there's these extreme cases with like severe suffering, and who gets to
mhm.
decide that? Who gets to
Right.
decide that point? And I feel like, with the euthanasia question and even abortion questions, at
Mhm,
the end of the day, I'm in that circumstance, it's like, who gets to decide? I don't think I want the state deciding necessarily, although the Bible
mhm,
even says that they're put in place by God, right? Romans 13 sort of idea,
mhm.
you could argue too, although that may or may not be applicable. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I know that even though they're given that authority, they will be held accountable for how they use it. So, which that I have a hard time wrapping my head around that concept of how nations eventually will be held accountable before God. Like, how does that work? And it's a question I don't think that there's a clear answer to in Scripture, but it's pretty clear that they will be. Um,
Yeah. And how much, like, when are we supposed to relinquish that to them?
right.
And
Yeah.
it seems like that not all circumstances, and certainly not if they're going against, I would argue, God's law, right?
Mhm.
Of course, people are going to cut that up differently, but because not all
Yep.
laws. I mean, like, for me as an Adventist, we think that's kind of going to be what the last deception is, when civil power tries to exert where it's not appropriate laws, right? So, but at the
Mhm.
same time, we still would say, we don't disbelieve in like police investigating murders and punishing
Mhm.
evildoers. So, like, we want the state to enforce some of God's law, but we don't want the state to enforce like how to worship, right? So it's kind of an interesting issue there. Like, obviously, most
Mhm.
people have said, if it goes against the applicable laws of God and the state tries to push something that's anti that, then we are supposed to stand against it. And like, what does that look like too? And then people have different arguments, and there's different positions for that too. Some people say I take the position that, we're to defend our family. So like, I believe, you're not supposed to kill or murder, but obviously that you're also supposed to protect your family, right? That sort of thing. So I'm not like what I forget what you call that position where it's like no violence whatsoever in any circumstance. I
Oh,
don't
a pacifist?
pacifist. Yeah, I don't think that's
Mhm.
what's being taught in the New Testament. But I think, yeah, it's a middle ground there.
I don't know. I just think that it all gets, and interestingly enough, when you look at the Levitical system, the jobs of priests and kings never were supposed to overlap. So worship, and so there was a very interesting version of the separation of church and state there, because the king was not supposed to do the duties of a priest, and the priest was not supposed to do the duties of a king. And so it goes way back, this whole idea. of, God's things are God's things, and God delegates those things to people differently and gives them to, distributes those to be overseen, not as one single entity or authority, but divides those up amongst, the governance of the civil state to one party or to the king, and the religious oversight to the chief priests and the high priest and the priests and the Levites. And it's interesting to me that works that way.
What are your thoughts on that? So I don't know if you were watching, I don't know if you caught the whole thing with on Faith Unaltered, which is really fun. I could have talked on that with Carrie too for probably all night, but so many places I would have liked to gone into the text, but and Heiser's work. But Serap says, have you seen this movie Hacksaw Ridge?
No, I haven't seen Hacksaw Ridge.
That's the story of the guy's an Adventist, and of course it's interesting, right? Because what's his name is Mel Gibson is the director, and he's Catholic, and the story's about an Adventist, and many Adventists were pacifists. They wouldn't take up arms, but the one guy he joined the army, and he ended up saving, he didn't carry a weapon, and he saved a bunch of people at Pearl Harbor or whatever by running around without a gun. And anyways, I love that movie, by the way, Serap, but so I just don't take that position that he does. A lot of Adventists take that position, but I think what you were saying though, Amber, was that the priest and king thing, and then Jesus is like a priest and king. And then Tyler had brought up something about, so my view normally with the priesthood is that the new covenant's different in that Jesus is the priest. And so not that we don't have leadership in the church and things like that. I would just say my view, you can kind of ask the question about how much of the old covenant sort of structure belongs in the new covenant. What kind of distinctions are there being taught? My view would be something like, Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world, and he's coming back. And so I kind of tend to think there's not really an authority of a priesthood per se in the new covenant, except for Jesus. But I think I can see why people would have different views on this. I just wondered what your thoughts on that are. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I do actually. So because I have kind of a little bit of a wonkier view on this too, just because of my own journey from wandering from thing to thing, sort of. And but we go back to looking at it when the law is given, right? And a lot of those things in Torah are the stuff that people argue about and is misunderstood, where you've got the laws about slavery and the laws about a bunch of those kinds of things, those instructions or those guidances. And my Torah professor explained it kind of this way, and I've been thinking about this for a year now, and it's evolving thought that a lot of those things is not the way that God intended things to be. And and if you think about it, if you think just the 10 Commandments and God says, thou shalt not kill. Well, that didn't work out very well. Humans didn't follow that very well. God knows humans. He knows our hearts. He knows how we are. And so several of that stuff in the Torah, in the codes there, what a lot of people refer to as the law, in those codes, that God, I think, is acknowledging that humans are going to continue as long as we are in this part of the journey of existence, I guess. As long as we're stuck in this temporal reality, I guess. I don't know, there's not a good way to say that, but that humans are going to be horrible to each other. And so God puts limits on those things. So, God's like, you're going to enslave each other, so I'm going to give you boundaries and rules to minimize the harm and the damage. It doesn't mean he's condoning it by any means at all. God condemns it pretty heavily, but he knows people, and he knows, so he's trying to give us parameters and rules and things that are not the ideal situation to keep us from doing even more damage to each other than we already do. And I don't think that that's always limited to just that. I think sometimes, like my personal view of where I've come to at this point is, I think we were created egalitarian, but now because of the fall and Genesis chapter 3 and how all that shakes out, we are egalitarian creations living in a complementarian world. And so God puts parameters on that to try to minimize the damage that we do to each other. And I think that in the New Testament, and that's what we see, ideally Jesus is the high priest and the rest of us have this equal status of priests, but we have to have some kind of ecclesiastical structure because we just can't get along and can't cooperate that way. And so we're given a structure that we weren't created for because we haven't finished our time in this fallen, broken world yet. And that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's right. The question is to what degree and how to do it right, the best way. Yeah, Adventists kind of have this sort of like idealistic call or whatever, I guess, right? With like, so we have pastors, and I think the church, like right now, like for instance, the official position is that men are pastors that lead the church, but like they let churches have women pastors, for instance, or something like that. And so they let individual churches decide, at least in America. I think most Adventists are worldwide and have more conservative views in certain parts of America for whatever. And so I'm undecided on that. I kind of identify as a soft egalitarian. That's probably on the soft side of complementarian. But I haven't studied it enough to want to like say much about it. But that's just kind of my thought on it. But at the same time, yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying regarding some of my friends in the chat who are Adventists. SDA official petition: do not join the military. So my view would be something like, I would take Desmond Doss, who's the guy who, it's quite an amazing story, really. I consider that something to admire, but I'm not going to like condemn people for taking up arms in the military. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't know. I presume that's kind of in jest there, that comment. I'm not sure though. So yeah, I mean, I respect people for taking that position. I'm not sure what I would do if I went into the military, if I would take up arms. I can see going either way, but I respect people like Desmond Doss. I think that's a really, really inspiring story, amazing story. He said, I think some of the things that he did, Gibson said he didn't even put in the movie because he didn't think people would believe it was true. The guy, like, I guess he like went into the middle of the thing and he like dragged people out of the battle zone or whatever, and then he like, there was like a hill and he had to like rope them up and like jimmy him down by a rope or whatever, and he saved like 75 people that way. And
wow.
And it's and they were just like, everybody hated him because he wouldn't take up arms, and they thought they were going to get him killed or whatever. And then he ends up saving all these people or whatever. It's quite an amazing story. But
that's crazy. It's amazing.
He got like a bunch of medals and stuff like that, and seemed like a miraculous story. But you can see why people wouldn't feel comfortable with someone who wouldn't defend them with a gun.
I think that's one of those things that falls under that thing in Romans where we're given freedom, but we also have to be careful with it, not to cause our brother to stumble. I think there's a lot of engagement with the Holy Spirit and what you can live with on your conscience, where you are in your relationship with God at that point. I think there's a lot of stuff that's left vague on purpose because I think there's a lot of the individual dwelling of relationship there. I don't think we were created for uniformity. I think we were created for unity, but through the beauty of the individuality of diversity.
Word. Yeah. I think that's right. And let's see. Well, any other thoughts on any of this stuff we've been talking about before I close it down?
Nope, nope. And actually, I got to run. Couldn't stay on here very long. I just wanted to. I love these really no answer hard questions and batting them around because we didn't get anywhere. I don't think, but
Yeah,
we had fun discussing it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I just try to put myself in the position, like, people are really ideological about that sort of thing, and I just think, well, what would it like? Let's be honest here. And I like to say, like, I'm against abortion no matter what. I feel good about saying that or whatever, but then I think, well, what would I really do if it was my family and, like, they were saying this or that, and it's like, how would I really respond? And I like to hear people's arguments either direction. I just think, let me be honest here, and I think I have to admit that I would be kind of irritated if the state was trying to tell me what I had to do or what my wife had to do. I would feel totally oppressed by that.
Yep. All righty, Jamie. Well, thanks
Alrighty.
for letting me jump on and bat this around with you. And I gotta run. But
I appreciate
have
your
a good
thoughts.
one, friend.
You too. Appreciate
Okay.
it. Well, I'll leave it there, guys. Let's see. You should look up Ron. So guys, look on my page. Make sure you set your. I'm interviewing Dr. Zivadinovich. I don't know if I say his name right, but it's on my next Tuesday at 4 p.m. my time, Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday. I'm gonna talk to Jason Zivadinovich, who is speaks several languages. He's a PhD in church history, works at Weimar University in California. He's going to join me and give a presentation on the Sabbath. And then hopefully we'll have time to chat and I can ask him difficult questions or pick his brain. So if you have questions you want to ask him, you can, and by the way, you can look up a lot of his work for free, or you can, on academia, you can get some of his work. Check him out on talking on the Advent Defense League. He talked about his paper on some eschatological issues that Adventists have. And I think he presents a more plausible picture that engages the literature better that's out there regarding history and our position. He's just bolstering our position better in a historical context. So you can watch that. They talk about his paper for several hours on the Advent Defense League. He's a really fun guy. Look up his work on YouTube. I've seen some of his other interviews. I really like his style and his boldness. So anyway, God bless you guys. See you later. If you want to disagree with me, leave comments in the comment section after the video closes or whatever. I'm open to changing my mind. That's just my honest opinion where I'm at. So God bless.